June 10th, 1983. Torrington, Connecticut. It's a warm Friday afternoon in a blue-collar town that prides itself on being quiet, safe, and close-knit. But on a small residential lawn on Taylor Street, the silence has been shattered by the sounds of a massacre. A police cruiser turns the corner. It rolls to a stop. Inside the car is Officer Kelly. He is the first responder to a frantic distress call. When he opens his car door and steps out onto the pavement, the scene in front of him is a nightmare. A young woman, 22-year-old Tracey Thurman, is lying in the grass. Her clothes are soaked red. She has been stabbed 13 times in the chest, the neck, and the face. Standing directly over her is a man named Buck. He is panting, agitated, and in his hand he is still gripping a bloody knife. Now pause for a moment. Picture that scene. In any standard police procedure, in any movie, in any rational world, this is the moment the officer draws his weapon. This is the moment he screams, "Drop the knife." This is the moment he sprints to place his body between the attacker and the dying victim. But Officer Kelly doesn't run. He doesn't draw his service weapon. He doesn't tackle the assailant. According to witnesses and later court testimonies, the officer simply stands by his car. He looks around the yard with a casual, almost confused demeanor. In the devastating legal battle that would follow, lawyers would describe his body language not as a man witnessing an attempted murder, but as a man who looked like he was casually searching for a lost dog. He treats a bloodbath like a minor nuisance. And because he waits, the horror continues. As the officer watches, fully uniformed, a symbol of safety and authority, Buck Thurman looks down at his wife, lifts his boot, and stomps on her head. The sound is sickening. That single blow, delivered under the supervision of the Torrington Police Department, breaks Tracey's neck, paralyzing her instantly. Only then does the officer move. But the question that will haunt this town, and eventually change the laws of the entire United States, is why. Why did a sworn protector of the peace watch a woman be destroyed in front of his eyes? Was it fear? Was it gross incompetence? Or was it because the man holding the knife wasn't a stranger, but a friend who served the officers coffee at the local diner? This is not just a story about a bad marriage. This is the story of a police force that decided some victims aren't worth saving. This is the case of Tracey Thurman. To understand how we ended up with a paralyzed woman and a passive police officer on a lawn in Connecticut, we have to go back to where the sun was shining. We have to go back to Florida. It's the early 1980s. Tracey is young, bright-eyed, and full of life. She meets Charles Thurman. Everyone calls him Buck. Buck is a short-order cook. He's a little older, a little rougher around the edges, but he has that undeniable intensity. To a young woman, that intensity can look a lot like passion. He is charming. He is attentive. He sweeps her off her feet with the kind of speed that, in hindsight, is always a red flag. They call it love bombing. It's a flood of affection designed to disarm you, to make you trust completely before you really know who you're dealing with. And it worked. Tracey and Buck married quickly. But the moment the ring went on, the dynamic shifted. It wasn't a gradual decline, it was a flip of a switch. You see, for men like Buck Thurman, marriage isn't a partnership. It is an acquisition of property. The charm evaporated, replaced by a suffocating jealousy. He needed to know where she was every second of the day. He needed to control who she spoke to, what she wore, and what she thought. And then came the isolation. Buck decided they needed to move. He took Tracey away from her friends, away from her family in the South, and moved her to his home turf, Torrington, Connecticut. This was a strategic move. In Torrington, Tracey was a stranger. She had no support system. But Buck was a local. He knew the streets, he knew the neighbors, and most importantly, for this story, he knew the police. As the months went on, the verbal abuse turned physical. The psychological terror ramped up, and Tracey did the bravest, most dangerous thing a victim of domestic violence can do. She left. She took their young son, Charles Jr., and she walked out. She moved into a friend's house across town. Now, you might ask, why would he want to kill her? If he hated her so much, if he treated her so badly, why not just let her go? This brings us to a terrifying psychological concept known as separation assault. Criminologists and psychologists have known for decades that the most lethal time in an abusive relationship isn't when the couple is fighting together. It is the moment the victim leaves. When Tracey left, she didn't just bruise Buck's ego, she shattered his reality. To a narcissist, the loss of control is a fate worse than death. He couldn't handle the idea that she had autonomy. He couldn't process that his property had walked away. The motive here wasn't love gone wrong. It wasn't a crime of passion in the traditional sense. It was punishment. Buck Thurman decided that if he couldn't control Tracey's life, he would simply end it. His mindset became the oldest, bloodiest cliché in the book. If I can't have you, no one can. For 8 terrifying months after she left, he didn't just grieve, he hunted, he stalked her. He told anyone who would listen what he was going to do. He wasn't hiding his intentions, he was sharpening his knife and waiting for his moment. And the tragedy is, he was telling the police exactly what he was going to do, every step of the way. Tracey sought refuge at the home of a friend, Judy Bentley. She was looking for safety. But for the next 8 months, she found herself living in a state of siege. This wasn't a case where a husband disappeared and then suddenly showed up with a weapon. This was a slow-motion car crash. For 8 months, Buck Thurman waged a campaign of absolute terror. He would stand outside the house at all hours, screaming through the locked doors. He would telephone her, his voice low and menacing, promising to put a bullet in her. Tracey did exactly what society tells women to do. She called the police, again and again and again. But when she picked up that phone, she was running headfirst into a brick wall of 1983 police culture. You have to understand, back then domestic violence wasn't treated as a crime. It was treated as a nuisance. In station houses across America, but specifically in Torrington, beating your wife was often categorized as a private family matter. Arresting a husband meant paperwork. It meant court dates. It was viewed as a waste of time, because in the eyes of the officers, the wife would probably just forgive him anyway. But in this specific case, there was something even more sinister than laziness at play. There was friendship. Buck Thurman wasn't just some anonymous criminal. He was a short-order cook at a local diner. And who eats at diners late at night? The police. Buck was the guy who poured their coffee. He was the guy who slipped them a free donut or comped their meals. He chatted with them about sports. He laughed at their jokes. To the officers of the Torrington Police Department, Buck wasn't a predator. He was good old Buck. He was their buddy. So pick on. When Tracey called to say Buck was threatening to kill her, the police didn't hear a victim screaming. They heard a nagging wife trying to get their friend in trouble. The warning signs they ignored are enough to make your blood boil. There was the afternoon Tracey was sitting in her car, and Buck, in a blind rage, smashed her windshield in with his bare hands while she was sitting right behind the glass. The police arrived, looked at the shattered glass, looked at the terrified woman, and refused to arrest him. They called it a civil dispute. Then it got worse. Buck escalated from threatening Tracey to threatening their toddler. He told her explicitly that he was going to shoot their son. When Tracey reported this death threat against a child, the police response was chilling. They essentially told her, "We can't do anything until he actually breaks the law." They needed him to hurt the child before they would stop him from hurting the child. Even the court system failed her. Buck was eventually convicted of a breach of peace, a slap on the wrist. He was given a suspended sentence and ordered to stay away. But a restraining order is just a piece of paper if the men with the guns refuse to enforce it. Buck violated that order constantly. He stood on her lawn, he followed her car, and every time Tracey called to report the violation, the police stayed at the station. They left her out there alone. They taught Buck Thurman a very dangerous lesson. The law does not apply to you. You are untouchable. And with that confidence, June 10th arrived. On the morning of June the 10th, 1983, the inevitable finally happened. Buck Thurman arrived at the house on Taylor Street. Tracey saw him through the window. Her heart must have stopped, but her instincts kicked in immediately. Her son, little Charles Jr., was asleep inside. Tracey knew that if Buck got through that door, he wouldn't stop at her. He would tear through anything in his path. So, she made a decision. She called the police one last time. She told them, clearly and terrified, "He is here. He is going to kill me." And then she walked out the front door. She offered herself up as a target in the open yard to draw the monster away from her sleeping child. Now, let's talk about geography for a second. The police station was mere minutes away. If you drove the speed limit, you could get to Taylor Street in under 5 minutes. If you were driving with lights and sirens, you could do it in 2. Tracey waited. And she waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. It took the Torrington Police Department 25 minutes to respond to an active threat against a woman they knew was being stalked. And in that 25 minutes, Buck Thurman went to work. He attacked Tracey on the lawn. He stabbed her in the chest. He slashed her throat. He stabbed her in the face. 13 separate wounds. She collapsed onto the grass, bleeding out, clinging to life by a thread. And that is when Officer Kelly finally pulled up. This is the moment where the story shifts from a tragedy to a scandal. Officer Kelly stops his car. He sees Tracey lying in a pool of blood. He sees Buck standing there. And Officer Kelly does nothing. He stays by the driver's side door. He looks around the neighborhood. His demeanor is so shockingly casual that later, in sworn depositions, witnesses would struggle to explain it. They said he looked like a man who wasn't sure why he was there. One theory that emerged was the dog theory, that his body language was that of a man looking for a lost stray, not a murderer. Another theory, perhaps even more disturbing, is the ketchup theory. In the 1980s, police were so cynical about domestic disputes that some officers admitted they often assumed blood at a domestic scene was fake, that the wife had poured ketchup or tomato sauce on herself to get her husband in trouble. Or was it simply that he saw Buck, his coffee buddy from the diner, and hesitated to pull a gun on a friend? Whatever the reason, that hesitation cost Tracey everything. Because while Officer Kelly stood there watching, Buck Thurman decided he wasn't finished. With a police officer standing 10 feet away, Buck walked over to Tracey's prone, bleeding body. He lifted his heavy work boot and he stomped directly onto her head. That kick didn't just hurt her, it snapped her neck. It severed her spinal nerves. The paralysis that Tracey Thurman would live with for the rest of her life didn't happen during the frenzied stabbing before the police arrived. It happened after, under the supervision of the law. And what did Buck say? He didn't run. He didn't panic. According to reports, he looked at the officer, almost with a sense of accomplishment, and said, "I told you I'd get the bitch." I told you. A phrase that implies familiarity. A phrase that implies he had warned them, and they had let it happen. Even after that final crippling blow, the nightmare wasn't over. Officer Kelly still didn't tackle him. He didn't throw him to the ground in handcuffs. Buck was allowed to pace around the yard. He walked over to the ambulance as they were loading Tracey's broken body onto the stretcher and continued to scream threats at her. He was still in control. The police were just spectators at the Buck Thurman show. It was a display of negligence so profound it's hard to believe it actually happened. But it did. And it was about to cost the city of Torrington millions of dollars. Against all medical probability, Tracey Thurman opened her eyes. She had survived 13 stab wounds. She had survived a broken neck. But the woman who woke up in that hospital bed was not the same woman who had walked out onto her lawn. She was partially paralyzed. The nerve damage was permanent. She would carry the physical scars of that day for the rest of her life. Most people, after surviving something so horrific, would just want to disappear. They would want to hide from the world and try to heal. But Tracey Thurman didn't want to hide. She wanted justice. And she realized that while Buck Thurman held the knife, the city of Torrington had held the door open for him. In 1984, she did something unprecedented. She filed a federal civil rights lawsuit, not just against her husband, but against the police department and the city itself. Her lawyer was a man named Burton Weinstein, and he came to court with a revolutionary argument. He didn't just argue that the police were lazy or incompetent. He argued that they had violated the United States Constitution. Specifically, he cited the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. Weinstein stood before the court and laid it out simply. If a stranger had attacked Tracey Thurman on the street, the police would have rushed in. They would have drawn their weapons. They might have even shot the attacker to save her. Tracey would have been protected. But because her attacker was her husband, the police treated the assault as a private matter. They treated her differently because of her marital status. Therefore, the police had denied her equal protection under the law. Weinstein went further. He argued that the police department's consistent refusal to arrest Buck, despite the broken windshields, the death threats, and the stalking, had effectively given Buck a license to kill. By doing nothing, the police had emboldened him. They had signaled to Buck that he was untouchable. The trial was devastating. The defense tried to argue that the police had discretion, that they couldn't be everywhere at once. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury was shown the bloody knife. They saw the jagged, bent blade that had nearly ended Tracey's life. But the most damning evidence wasn't what was seen. It was what was heard. Weinstein played the tapes from the police dispatch. The jury sat in stunned silence as they listened to the dispatchers discussing Tracey's desperate calls for help. They didn't hear urgency. They didn't hear concern. They heard jokes. They heard the police mocking her. They heard officers dismissing a terrified woman as a nag, laughing about the domestic trouble at the Thurman house while she was literally being hunted. It stripped away the blue wall of silence. It revealed a culture of misogyny and indifference that was impossible to defend. The jury didn't need long. They returned with a verdict that hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. They found the city of Torrington liable. They awarded Tracey Thurman $2.3 million. Today, that sounds like a lot. In the mid-1980s, for a civil rights case against a small town, it was astronomical. It was a financial earthquake. It was the judicial system finally saying what the police refused to admit. Domestic violence is not a family matter. It is a crime, and if you refuse to stop it, you will pay the price. The verdict in Thurman v.'s City of Torrington didn't just bankrupt a small-town insurance policy, it woke up the entire nation. Almost immediately, the state of Connecticut passed the Thurman Law. It was a radical shift in how policing was done. It stripped officers of that dangerous discretion they had used to ignore Tracey for 8 months. The new law was simple and non-negotiable: mandatory arrest. Before Tracey Thurman, an officer could look at a battered wife and tell the husband to take a walk around the block to cool off. After Tracey Thurman, if there is probable cause of domestic violence, the handcuffs go on. The cooling off period happens in a jail cell. It started in Connecticut, but the fear of liability, the fear of another $2.3 million lawsuit, spread like wildfire. Police departments from California to New York rewrote their handbooks overnight. The Thurman Law became the blueprint for the Violence Against Women Act, passed federally years later. But what about the people involved? What happened to the monsters and the heroes of this story? The criminal justice system wasn't quite as progressive as the civil courts. Buck Thurman was convicted of assault, but not attempted murder. He was sentenced to 20 years, but because of the leniency of the era, he served less than 8. He walked out of prison in 1991. It is a bitter pill to swallow that a man who butchered his wife and stomped on her neck in front of a police officer served less than a decade behind bars. But Tracey didn't let him define her. Despite the paralysis, despite the permanent nerve damage and the physical scars that mapped her body, Tracey Thurman rebuilt her life. She remarried, a good man this time. She raised her son, Charles Jr., the boy she had walked out onto that lawn to protect. She lived a quiet, private life, far away from the cameras. She never wanted to be a symbol. She just wanted to be safe. So, the next time you hear a siren wail in the distance, or the next time you read a news story about a domestic abuser being arrested before he can kill, remember June 10th, 1983. Remember the officer who stood by his car, looking for a phantom dog while a woman bled out on the grass. Remember the department that treated a stalker like a friend. Because the system we have today, flawed as it still may be, exists because that system failed Tracey Thurman. She took 13 stab wounds and a broken neck so that millions of women who came after her wouldn't have to. This has been the story of Tracey Thurman. Thank you for listening.